on the polls. I see that in the middle of the word cloud, is it on a screen, the word cloud? I can't see it on a screen. No, is it on a screen? It isn't on a screen. Maybe it should be on a screen. It's on your screens. I see East-West Rail Progress is in the middle as big and central, and that certainly came across from a lot of the questions that came out earlier on. East-West Rail Progress is fundamental, and thanks to Beth, I think it's Beth shot off now, thanks to Beth for updating us where we are with that very important project. Right, we've got 2 panel sessions that are going to take us up to lunch, so lots of opportunity for more questions. In a little while we're going to look at innovation and how you create an environment that allows innovation to flourish across this region. But first, we've got a very distinguished panel here. They are here, and over the next 35 minutes, we're going to talk about Heartland-based business clusters. What are they, you say? What are they? We're going to find out all about those in a few minutes' time. But let me introduce them. Jeremy Long. Jeremy, welcome. Chair of Oxlep, the Local Enterprise Partnership. Welcome, Jeremy. Pim van Baarsen, CEO of the Silverstone Technology Cluster. So, Pim, he knows what a cluster is. Joe Chapman, Head of Public Affairs at London Stansted Airport and East Midlands Airport. Welcome, Joe. And Nigel McKenzie, Project Manager at Westcott Venture Park, which, that's a cluster, isn't it? It is a cluster. So let's kick things off. Jeremy, set the scene for us. I mean, what exactly, as I say, business clusters, give us a perspective on how improved connectivity might enable these business clusters to fulfill the region's growth ambitions. What exactly are clusters? Why are they so important to driving the economy in the heartland? Jeremy, just give us a few moments on that.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Well, clusters are not new. I mean, if one thinks actually back to the Victorian period, there was a cluster around shipbuilding on the Clyde. There was a cluster in the potteries around Stoke. This is not a new phenomenon, but I think if one looks back, clusters, the coming together of industries and a workforce, they were typically in inner urban areas. And I think if one makes the contrast, increasingly the kind of clusters we're seeing today are on the edge of urban areas, or in some cases, even more directly outside. What is a cluster? As you said, it's a coming together of businesses often with very common sectoral backgrounds. They represent for those businesses the best way of drawing from their local employment skill force, the best way of drawing from their local supply chains, often the best way of drawing off local research and development capability from universities or elsewhere. And looked at from the point of view of the employee, they also represent often the best way of creating career prospects. If you and your family were choosing to live somewhere, it makes much more sense for you to be able to develop your career on a relatively near doorstep, for you to be able to look at your prospects, for your own children to be going to the same school rather than having to uplift partway through your career and move a long way away to progress your career. So clusters make sense economically and socially.
Okay. Why do you think transport then, I mean, first and foremost, they are physical things, they're physical bringing together, is it, rather than just a virtual bringing together?
Well, we are increasingly seeing virtual clusters, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it in terms of some of the relationships, even between those of us represented on the panel. You do get physical clusters, but then increasingly in a digital world, we get clusters relating to other clusters.
Yeah, but fundamentally, it's that physical togetherness that makes transport so fundamental to driving them.
And as I was saying, if one actually looks today at what are the more common characteristics of where clusters have emerged, there is a need for very, very local transport. In some cases, as we've been hearing this morning, more than just the last mile connection. You need very good medium distance transport connections to really make that cluster prosper. Okay.
Well, Nigel, Westcott Venture Park, I mean, do you agree with Jeremy's analysis of what they're all about and why they're so successful?
Well, Westcott's a 650-acre business park, halfway between Bicester and Aylesbury on the A41.
Does that make it a cluster?
Yeah, well, no, it's a cluster because it's got a heritage in rocket testing, rocket propulsion, which dates back to 1946, and there's still a lot of rocket testing and propulsion that goes on today. And a lot of the companies today are sort of coalescing, if you like, around that capability. It's a test capability, really. You can't really test rockets everywhere. There's only really a very few places you can do that. So we tend to have a draw, if you like, and a draw and a link with other clusters who are related. So we've got scientists and engineers involved in propulsion, but they might be working at Cranfield, they might be working at Harwell, might be working at Silverstone. So they need to interact and visit us as a cluster. That's basically how we interact, I think.
Pim, what is your take on it? What's your experience in the region? Obviously, Silverstone, synonymous with motor racing technology. Is it just that?
No, it's not just that. Obviously, it had its origins in motorsport, but for me, the key to clusters is the interconnectivity within the supply chain between various industries as well. And what we've seen around the Silverstone area, because motorsport is only about 20% of what our guys do, and our cluster roughly consists of 4,500 businesses involved in advanced engineering, electronics, and software. But they work across a wide range of sectors, and they collaborate with a lot of people from different sectors as well. And it's that interconnectivity and the exchange between personnel, but also contracts and commercial collaborations that really make up the cluster. So it's actually more than a sum of its parts.
Okay. Well, Joe, why is an airport operator like Manchester Airports Group so interested and supportive of business clusters?
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for inviting me along today. I think if we just take a step back for a second, the role that airports play in powering regional growth is very well documented. So in 2016, our sister airport, Manchester, which we're part of the group, established a direct air route to Beijing for the first time. 2 years later, we conducted independent research that found that export volumes from Manchester to China grew by 40% during that same period when national values fell. And the number of Chinese students studying in Manchester grew by 9% versus an average of 4% for the UK. Basically, when airports develop their route networks, that drives businesses in our catchments by boosting trade prospects. So I've just led a year-long programme of work that looks at how Stansted, as an airport, by supplying additional international connectivity, could really support the clusters, in particular in Cambridge, world-class life sciences clusters and so on. And it's really impressive, actually. So to give you just one example, if we could establish a direct air corridor between Cambridge and Boston in Massachusetts, served by Stansted, we think that would yield an economic dividend for the region of just shy of £100 million in additional investment, just by bringing those clusters together, promoting knowledge transfer and making it easier for entrepreneurs and investors in America to invest in the clusters and businesses over here.
Okay, Jeremy, we heard obviously a lot about the aspirations and the plans that are put in place in EEH. I mean, what for you has to change to really drive forward and accelerate the growth of clusters in this area?
Well, I think, as we have heard this morning, I think government creating the confidence in terms of long-term commitment to the kind of infrastructure spend that we would all, I think, like to see in this region. Mm-hmm. And I think, as was characterised, there is real evidence, and I might draw comparison with Crossrail, the Elizabeth Line in London. When Transport for London committed to Crossrail and Elizabeth Line, what one saw was years ahead of that was the investment coming along that line of route, the regeneration that occurred, businesses taking their own decisions ahead of time to come in. And as we know, there is enormous potential in this region to see parts develop, to create what will be future prosperity. I think the word growth, if I may say so, the word growth is often used by us because I think we understand it. But I think there still is a job to do to explain what we might mean by growth in human terms, about future prosperity for individuals, their own children, and indeed the children's children, of what it will mean in a region to be creating the jobs for tomorrow.
Well, let's try and I suppose, unpack and explain. The phrase that I use: why are clusters so exciting, Pim? When you're trying to sell the benefits of them, they're mini businesses, they're social ecosystems in of themselves. I mean, why are they so exciting, and how can England's economic heartland really work to support those ecosystems?
Well, I mean, in our case, it's pretty obvious because you get to work with some amazing motorsport teams, but also world-beating Olympic athletes. We have a lot of companies that are very disruptive and changing the game in automotive, but also in medical, also in space, also in defense. So there's a lot of exciting areas to really get into. And one of the things that is quite key for us is that, and I'm sure that's replicated everywhere, that all of our businesses are crying out for new engineers, new personnel. So to highlight the jobs that are available, but also to highlight the area as a potential area for people to engage and work in, because it is actually quite a nice place as well.
But is it the key to this high wage economy that we hear so much about?
Yeah, it will be, because a lot of our businesses are very much involved in developing technologies that will change the games in terms of automotive, EVs and all that sort of stuff. A lot of big businesses are coming to a lot of companies within our particular cluster to help them solve the problems for the future. So there is an awful lot of activity. We're branching out to a lot of other clusters as well to help them with their challenges as well. So for us particularly, it's very much part of it. But the interconnectivity and making sure that everybody's able to actively and prosperously work and live in the area is key to all of that. Because if there's no good access to anywhere, or it's not a pleasant place to live, or it's difficult to get around, or you're frustrated every time you engage in any sort of transport, then it's not a conducive environment to live or work in. So that needs to be addressed in order to make sure that the companies can prosper further.
Nigel, do you agree? I mean, we hear a lot also about this idea of cross-fertilization and specializations and agglomeration within those communities of experts. I mean, is that the long and short of it? It is all about bringing together those like-minded people.
It is, and those clusters and connecting to academia, to universities, it crosses the sort of county boundaries. That's, I think, where the heartland is probably, that's the biggest thrust from my point of view today, is that we need to we're interacting with people in Oxfordshire, Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire. We need to find solutions for transport that are across those county boundaries, I think, because though they're not just in Buckinghamshire, so we work very closely with Bucks Council, with Bucks Lep, but there are other authorities that we need to be interacting with to make sure we've got that transport sort of solution, really.
Okay. One final point for the moment, before we move to some questions. They're flooding in, which is great. To what extent, Jeremy, do you think planners and transport infrastructure professionals need to think differently when planning transport investment to really try to support this? It's not a new concept, but it's this increasing concept of clusters.
I think they do, and I think there's great recognition, dare I say, on part of an organisation like EEH about the new hub and spoke that is being created by clusters. And indeed, some of the clusters themselves, the owners are taking it upon themselves to organise their own public transport requirements. So if I took Harwell, for example, I mean, Harwell now has close on 100 businesses in space, close on 100 businesses in life science, and close on 100 businesses in clean energy. Now, if you go back a decade or more, those numbers would have been tiny. But the rate of growth means that Harwell itself is planning its own transport needs within Harwell and to and from Harwell to the centre of Oxford, and obviously with the benefit of East West Railway and so on, onwards.
And do you think the Heartland understands that sufficiently?
I think it's reaching out. I mean, I think it does. I think in the way that it's drawing up plans, and we in turn are then presenting them to central government, because it is in turn about the infrastructure investment that central government will need to make, the understanding that the local bus companies in turn have to have about where their demand really is that they perhaps are not realising. Okay. That's where the working together, I think, will make for better transport connections.
Okay. If I may add to that, because the owners of Silverstone Park are making significant investments in ride-sharing apps and infrastructure improvements and all that sort of stuff. But it really needs to come from the collaboration. They can't do that in isolation, and they really need to make sure that there's more effective links with the wide area. I mean, the cluster effectively spends anywhere from an hour's driving time from Silverstone, so it's quite a large patch, covering quite a lot. And especially from a sustainability point of view, more work needs to be done to make sure that we create an infrastructure that is sustainable and manageable going forward. Yeah. But it needs to be in collaboration. We can't just leave it to the owners of Silverstone Park or individual organisations to do that. It needs to have a cross-area collaboration for that.
And I suppose the final thought, just building on what we heard a lot about this morning, was freight, Nigel. Transport links, it's all about connecting people, but I suppose it's also about getting those products, getting those materials, getting that freight to and from these clusters.
It is, and it's a challenge. And a lot of those clusters they're not in urban areas. They're not in. They are either on the edge of urban areas, or in our case, Westcott. It's rural, and you need to be connected for those reasons as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and I suppose, Joe, airports are many of your airports are the freight hubs in and amongst themselves primarily.
Yeah, I mean, well, East Midlands Airport, which I also work for, is the largest dedicated air cargo airport in the country. So by volume, most of it goes out from Heathrow because it goes in the belly hold of passenger flights. But then beyond that, yes, Stansted and East Midlands make a huge contribution in terms of exporting goods as well.
So a question for John Broad. I'm going to direct it at you, Joe. If clusters are so good at airports, why is Doncaster closing?
I mean, that's a very good question. I can't speak in depth about their own business model, essentially. What I can talk to you about at Stansted is, first of all, we have a low-cost leisure market, which is a huge portion of our revenue, which is led by anchor tenants such as Ryanair, which is growing. I mean, we're back at over 90% now of our 2019 volumes, fastest recovering airport in the UK. But the point is, we can develop our route network into long-haul destinations in Asia and America, and that actually complements the low-cost stuff in terms of the timetabling and the scheduling. So it's a really great opportunity for us.
Another question here from the community of Woburn. Our region has too much freight and warehousing with low-quality jobs and environmental damage. Communities want high-value jobs and a nice place to live and work. I mean, I imagine you'd agree with that, Pim.
Yeah.
All of it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, all of our businesses are knowledge-driven businesses. They're rather great jobs. We actually, even from an educational point of view, we go into a lot of schools to, try and dispel the notion that engineers are big men with beards and greasy hands and all that sort of stuff, because that's not what it's about.
Okay. Well, on that note, there's also a question here. Can we please have no all-male panels? Apologies, taken. Yes, very good point. I'm looking at you at the back there, Paul. No, it is a very good point. It's a very good point, and we do try very hard not to do that. So my apologies. I've lost where I was there. There's a question here. Building on that, can some of the wealth generated by clusters help improve and refocus our school education and apprenticeships?
Well, as Prince referred to, I mean, that's exactly what is happening. Indeed, again, if I talk about the clusters in Oxfordshire, bringing schools onto it to get youngsters at a very early stage to understand, and indeed their teachers to understand some of the career opportunities. These are new industries, and for many teachers, dare I say, these are industries that they would not understand that well. But getting kids to understand the potential, taking on apprenticeships. I mean, as the Oxfordshire Let, we run a very active apprenticeship scheme, matching employers with apprentices, and a lot of those are now being found on the key clusters in Oxfordshire.
Pim?
Yeah, completely agree. It's absolutely vital. As I said before, our members are crying out for personnel, not just engineers, but across all sectors. And for kids and teachers not to realize what a fantastic opportunity they have right on the doorstep to really get involved with some absolutely game-changing companies, going for exciting careers, fulfilling careers, doing interesting things that make real differences in the world. How as a kid would you not be excited about that? And obviously, it's one of the reasons I came to this country as well.
All right. Question here. Clusters are only attractive investment to investment and talent if you think about where people want to live. Villages, schools, green spaces are vital, or they go elsewhere. Nigel, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. I mean, I think there's a lot more to people's working environment these days. I think younger people coming into business, to science, engineering, they're expecting a lot more than just the job. They're expecting things to be around the job. We're getting people requesting sort of running tracks, gyms, creches, that sort of thing. People are looking at that holistically, I think, more these days in terms of their work environment. So it's important to have that. And also, if you can live nearby, that's great. I mean, I think we have an issue probably in the south of England with the cost of living. I think, for cost of renting is a tricky one for us. So.
But it's an interesting challenge in this region, across this region, because there is this huge rural community, but also very large urban communities as well. I mean, how do you make that balance between people who live in a rural community because they want to live in the middle of nowhere with nothing around? You start increasing the size of your clusters and the transport that links them up, then does it destroy, or does it put at risk the main reason people want to be here?
I mean, I think, as I said earlier, in some ways, actually, a cluster will offer the individual the opportunity to progress their career without having to take their children out of school and move up and down the country every time they seek a promotion. I mean, one of the benefits is people can choose an area, they can build a network of friends, they can build their own social life around an area that they've chosen, and they can make their own careers. It's one of and from an employer's point of view, it also means there is a constant inflow of talent, and they can recruit more easily, I mean, with difficulty, but more easily. They can find the pool of skills that they're looking for.
Okay. And if I may be really Dutch about this for a moment, why don't we make use of the nice countryside and improve our cycling infrastructure? So we encourage more people to go for active traveling and, utilize the bicycles and enjoy the nature that's out there as well.
Okay. There's a question here. Clusters need upfront support for transport infrastructure justified by jobs, economic benefits. Should they also have a long-term role in paying back that investment? Nigel.
Clusters paying back. Well, I mean, I think it was mentioned earlier, but we're the guys who own Westcott Venture Park. They are actually investing themselves in transport systems just to basically to access the staff, the engineers, the scientists that live a little bit further away. Mm-hmm. So what they're doing is they're investing